Good morning, dear students. I'm going to explain you myths, legends and folk tales from children's literature subject. I suggest that this subject will be very useful and effective for you requiring this subject. So, myths, legends and folk tales. Storytelling is very common to every culture. Most people enjoy listening to the stories. Storytellers have catered to the need for good stories since the beginning of civilization. Most people have their own favorite story from their childhood, and often these tales are both fascinating and frightening. For example, these stories include legends, myths, and folk tales. For me, I think Little Red Riding Hood is my favorite folk tale. So, what are legends? A legend is a semi-true story which has been passed on from person to person and has important meaning or symbolism for the culture in which it originates. A legend usually includes an element of truth or is based on historic facts, but with mythical qualities. Legends usually involve heroic characters or fantastic places and often encompass the spiritual beliefs of the culture in which they originate. As for English, for example, the King Arthur is legend. And what are myths? A myth is a story based on tradition or legend which has deep symbolic meaning. A myth conveys a truth to those who tell it and hear it, rather than necessarily recording to true event. Although some myths can be accounts of actual events, they have become transformed by symbolic meaning or shifted in time or place. Myths are often used to explain universal and local beginnings and involve supernatural beings. The great power of the meaning of these stories to the culture in which they developed is a major reason why they survive as long as they do, sometimes for thousands of years. So, what are folk tales? A folk tale is a popular story that was passed on in spoken form from one generation to the next. Usually the author is unknown and there are often many versions of this tale. Folk tales comprise fables, fairy tales, old legends and even urban legends. Again, some tales may have been based on a partial truth that has been lost or hidden over time. It's difficult to categorize the folk tales precisely because they fit into many categories. Folk tales are often referred to as told tales. So, what is the difference between legends, myths, and folk tales? Myths, legends, and folk tales are hard to classify and often overlap. Imagine a line or continuum as illustrated below. Here you can see here. Factual. Imagine a line control as illustrated below with a historical account based on facts at one end and myths or cultural folk tales at the other. As you progress towards the mythical folk tale end of the line, what an event becomes of a greater historical significance than the facts, which become less important. By the time you reach the far end of the spectrum, the story has taken on a life of its own, and the facts of the original event, if there ever was one, have become almost irrelevant if its message that is important. Why was the stories told? As well as making fascinating reading, these stories also tell us a great deal about how people in the past saw and understood the world around them. There are many reasons why stories are told and passed down the generations. Here are just a few of them. To strengthen a community and provide a common understanding, stories often reflect the beliefs of the people who tell them. The popularity of any story depends on whether those listening approve of the values underlying it. By telling and listening to stories, people confirmed their ideas about the world around them. Things that people found scary, infuriating, or desirable all found their way into the stories, and they were passed on because people wanted to be assured that other people around them were thinking along the same lines. As a way of providing moral guidance and showing people how they should conduct themselves, including the consequences of not doing so. Myths and legends, like any good stories, often include moral. Within the myth, the hurt or embarrassment experienced by people is often due to their own stupidity, greed, dishonesty, or negligence. To explain how the world works, for example, why the seasons change, and to explain strange happenings or phenomena such as eclipses, the reasons for which were unknown in early times. And for entertainment purposes, stories were told to amuse and enthrall an audience in the days before TV and other forms of mass entertainment. To pass on history and knowledge, such as the outcome of battles and tales of courage, and in ages when many people couldn't read or write. Many myths have an element of truth that has been built on and embellished over the years. For fame, money, and recognition, as in all areas of life, not all stories were told for good reasons. For example, stories of bravery in a battle could enhance the status of an individual or a group, or in later centuries, a good ghost story could be sold for money. The truth wasn't always the important consideration. Regardless of why they were told, many of the stories still remain popular today, and although we're no longer swept stories around the fireside, the tradition of storytelling still continues in the form of urban legends. Many older stories also live on in current-day carnivals or festivals, which have their roots in a very different past. Features and myths of myths and legends. They are retelling. The orientation is typically timeless. A single animal is a representative of all animals of that kind, and natural forces like wind and fire are represented by gods or godlike form. The resolution of myths and legends explain why things are the way we are. A classic opening and a closing. So they were the features, descriptive features of myths and legends. So if we go to the next slide, here you can see the representative of good and evil in characters. Stereotypes, animals, for example, wolves are very bad and rescuers are male in main stories. The representative of certain values, for example, wealth, it refers to happiness, and beauty refers to also happiness. The involvement of supernatural forces, fairy godmothers, creatures that can talk. Tales are based around themes like trickery and foolishness. Summarizing the outcome of myths or legend, but still to this day, so every time you see these comments sum up how things came to be. So what makes a hero? A hero is someone who is distinguished for his or her courage or ability. They are admired for brave deeds and noble qualities. They may have performed heroic acts. They may also be someone who is a model or an ideal. Make a list of, so I will give you an activity. Make a list of all the heroes you can think of, both real and fictional. Think about the person in your life you might consider a hero. Write a short explanation or story about why you consider him or her to be a hero. It will be your homework from this subject, from this lesson. So, folk tales and tall tales. A tall tale is a story that provides enjoyment to a wide variety of audience. Tall tales stretch the imagination through colorful figurative language and exaggerations. Tall tales are also known as line tales. They are humorous exaggerations. Tall tales may come from other countries, but we are most familiar with American ones. So attributes of tall tales, they are often about the frontier days in the United States, and they are an exaggeration of the hardships of frontier life. Tall tales may be about animals and the weather, everyday events and ordinary people, but the more famous tales are about the heroes. Tall tales often feature oversized people and exaggerated deeds. So it was our last slide. As you see, you were familiar with the myths, legends and folk tales. So I think that this video lesson will be very useful for acquiring this lesson from children's literature. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.